Chris Grier speaks. JuJu Brents off the waiver wire. Some more transactions, practice squad additions. One of the busiest shows of the summer. So let's not waste any time and get into it here on Locked On Dolphins.
You are Locked On Dolphins, your daily Miami Dolphins podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
All right, Miami, welcome to another episode of Locked On Dolphins. It is your team every day here on the Locked On Network. I'm your host, Kyle Krabs, a lifelong Miami Dolphins fan, host of Locked On Dolphins, co-host of Locked On NFL Scouting, author of Touchdown Miami on Substack, NFL staff writer for A to Z Sports. Want to give a special welcome and shout out to our everydayers because it is your team every day. We don't just say it, we live it here on the Locked On Network. Today's episode of Locked On Dolphins is brought to you by FanDuel. Football season is around the corner. Visit the FanDuel app today. Start planning your futures bets now. Start planning your next 30 minutes because it's going to be busy. There was a little bit of everything today. Roster cuts yesterday. Noon rolls around. Waiver wire submissions get done. You start getting some practice squad reports. The Dolphins reportedly bringing back a familiar face for the 53, reportedly bringing back a familiar face for the practice squad. Get a waiver wire claim from the Indianapolis Colts to add to the secondary, but a familiar problem in the secondary rears its ugly head again. We hear from Chris Grier, one of just a handful of times throughout the course of the year that we get a chance to hear from Chris, and this is a lot. It's a lot to get into. So let's not waste any time, and let's start with the Chris Grier presser because this is the first thing that happened today. And what I want to do is kind of pick my way through some of the things that Chris Grier talked about. It was a long presser. It was about 30 minutes. And I appreciated the comprehensive nature. I think Chris was pretty candid. I think Chris was pretty honest about some of the dynamics of the room, kind of the state of affairs of the team, the strategy. It falls into a lot of things that we've been talking about. He used that dreaded word reset. And I know for some people, you hear the word reset and your brain turns off, and anything that's said before or after the word reset doesn't matter. But Chris Grier talked about reset and what the reset was for the Dolphins this year and the context behind it. The first question he was asked, unlike some past Marches, there hasn't been a big free agent spending spree this year. I think it's worth noting the Dolphins have not been big free agent spenders on the open market in the last 3 years. Like what they did this year, last year they had the Jordan Brooks contract and the Aaron Brewer contract. And this year was just the James Daniels contract. But they have largely not been competitive in the deep end of that pool and been more economic in strategy for 3 years running now. Was that decision to not give out huge contracts out to outside free agents a decision that Stephen Ross recommended to you? Was that something you and Brandon Shore recommended to Steve as a new way of doing business? I'd like to reiterate that's kind of how they've been doing business in free agency. Here's what Chris Grier had to say in response to that question. Steve has never given us a directive on how to do it. We meet with him, Brandon and I, spend time with him and Tom Garfinkel and obviously Mike McDaniel, talk through our plan. Every year is different. We've had years here where it's been a little bit more draft focused for a couple of years. And then at some point you have to reset. When you go and you make aggressive moves like we made for a few years, you have to reset again and start it over because it's not a sustainable way the contracts are with players and what they're making now. So in terms of directive, no, for us, it was just good business sense, working through it and trying to find value. But we also had to get younger. So we added younger players. Like a year ago, we were one of the teams with all the one-year vet contracts. We're in a different spot now, adding young players. That's the direction we're going right now. We've been very happy with it so far. If this sounds familiar, it's because you can go back to the 2025 Miami Dolphins offseason blueprint. And what do we talk about? We had 5 primary core objectives for things that we wanted to achieve with this offseason from the Dolphins standpoint and a Dolphins point of view. And those things we're talking about being more cap health notable, getting younger, mitigating injury risk as an extension of that. These are the things that Chris Grier's talking about. Is it a reset the entire organization? No. And he was asked to clarify that. You said earlier, use the words reset and younger, trying to change things up. This franchise hasn't won a playoff game in the last quarter century. Those words, do they still line up with the possibility of this being a team that can finally break that drought? And here's what Chris said. In terms of reset, it was just talking about the money philosophy and spending. But like I told you, we're always going to try to win the season. It's all about winning in 2025. It was never going to be take a step back. And then he goes to point out some changes that those who have been in attendance throughout training camp and OTAs and the spring offseason program, things that they've noticed that have been a little bit different about getting into that other buzzword, culture, right? Team culture. But this is when we talk about team life cycles on the program. And I've alluded to this a few times as far as there's a tipping point, a point of no return. And if you, as an organization, you can spend cash over cap for a period of time, you could be really aggressive with taking draft picks and bringing in mature contract players and players in their primes or players that are entering into the second half of their careers, and you're paying a premium for them. But if you do it long enough, you can do anything you want for a certain amount of time. But you can't rob Peter to pay Paul every year in perpetuity. There's going to come a point where those players that you've locked yourselves into because you've deferred their contracts a whole bunch of times, they become unflexible, rigid. And then those players don't perform to that level of what the cost is anymore. Like this is what you see with the Cleveland Browns and the New Orleans Saints of the world, especially the New Orleans Saints. And from the Dolphins' perspective, I appreciate that this team did not put another Band-Aid over it and say, yeah, let's add 3 more big players, splash players, and go at it again this year. Because that's kind of like what led to the constant purgatory of the 2010s. The Jeff Ireland years, right? The Tannenbaum era of Miami from the Ndamukong Suh contracts and those efforts, right? I've made the basketball analogy here on the show before with the process 76ers. And they had all the draft picks and they made all the draft picks and they mature and some of them don't work out, like Markelle Fultz, and Joel Embiid is a really talented player, but he struggled to stay healthy in some of those marquee winning windows. And the Sixers just kept saying, we're 1 year away, we're 1 year away, we're 1 year away. Let's keep adding another big player. Let's add Paul George. And guess what? Paul George is not Paul George of 5 years ago. And he's an awful contract. And Joel Embiid gets hurt again, and the Sixers win like 22 games. And that's when they're talking about a reset of the money and the strategy. It's to avoid, you're trying to compete through transition without pushing yourself past the point of no return where you're going to be locked in and your core is your core and those contracts are unpliable and you just have to ride it out until players decide to retire or the contracts expire. And that's not a very pleasant world to live in because that's what's going on in New Orleans. And that's been a steady bleed of talent out of New Orleans because they can't afford the new contracts for years. So yeah, the cash over cap element of the Dolphins has shifted. That's the reset. It's cyclical with the spend. It's cyclical with the maturation of rookie contracts into second contracts, right? The Dolphins drafted with all this volume in 21 and 22. Well, all those contracts grow up and now you got to pay some of those players and you could pay everyone, but then that's really all you get. Or you can strategically work your way through it. Now they accelerated their own window and they learned some lessons the hard way. And Chris Grier talked about that as well. We're going to get into that next here on Locked On Dolphins. So make sure you guys stick with us. Today's episode of Locked On Dolphins is presented by Yahoo Fantasy. The NFL season is right around the corner. You can feel the buzz in the air. Fantasy football season is here. Everyone is researching, drafting, building championship squads. If you haven't joined a league yet, it's all happening on Yahoo Fantasy. This year, I'm playing on Yahoo Fantasy as I have every year for almost 20 years with my friends from home. You should too, whether you're a first-timer or a veteran competing in your 1 millionth league. To kick off the season on September 4th, you can now get ready to play on Yahoo Fantasy. They've offering a ton of fun ways to compete, whether that's the brand new Guillotine League mode where the lowest scoring team each week is eliminated until there's just one team left. You could draft with friends with the Draft with Friends mode and play with your friends instantly. If you prefer the classics, you can join a head-to-head private league as well. The NFL season kicks off on September 4th. So don't wait. Start your league now. Draft now at yahoofantasy.com/lockedonnfl. That's yahoofantasy.com/lockedonnfl. Chris talked about the lesson they learned the hard way, and they've learned a few, right? And for me, it's just the affirmation of trying to understand the why behind the Dolphins, because I have my opinions on things that I would do or things that I would not do or how I would go about doing business. But like, I really like to explore the why. Why is the team operating this way? Why did the team pick this player? Why did the team do this transaction? Why did the team have this call on this down and distance? Why do they like this player to play this role? That's really, for me, the core of the show is the why. I like to explore the why. But Chris, in talking about some of the lessons that they've learned and had to learn the hard way, he was asked about the culture element of this football team. And he got into some of the big part of the quote was, we're not sure if we're winning in the right way, which I felt was powerful. It was a powerful quote, I thought. He said, you saw it from day one in OTAs, the offensive and defensive groups would stay out in the field. This is talking about the culture of the team. Offensive and defensive groups would stay out on the field on their own, which I've never seen here in years, for like an hour afterwards as a group by themselves on their own time, walking through stuff, going through, holding each other accountable. The stuff you saw in the joint practices of our guys getting on each other about competing, that hadn't happened here in years. So it's a different mindset led by Mike, and what we talked about right from that last team meeting at the end of last season when he told them what it was going to be. And then he would continue a little later when asked about the culture and the kind of the aha moment for the need for a culture shift. And he expanded on a little bit more. When you bring in so many new players that have been star players at other places and you work through it, you as kind of those running the team have your expectations, but you're winning, right? So you have your expectations, but you're winning. But you look at it and say, hey, I don't know if we're winning in the right way. At times, some guys, it didn't matter to them. And so moving on from those people with the right guys here and focusing on that, the whole goal was to win a lot more games than we did last year. This is our time now in terms of doing everything moving forward. This goes back to the Louis Riddick on with Marissa Marino on Dolphins Talk interview. Marissa had an excellent interview with Louis Riddick, and he talked at length about what he felt some of the core problems with the Dolphins was. And it was too many places from players from other places where how you do your business has been established. So there's differing opinions. So the buy-in from all the players, all the meaningful players, all the most well-compensated players, the leaders in the locker room, those players all buying in universally as compared to players that are drafted here, brought up here, developed here, and told from the jump, this is how we're going to be a professional. This is our way of doing things. This is how we're going to do it. That was missing with what the Dolphins had to learn the hard way with that strategy. And I've said before, I felt the Dolphins lost the plot. The entire appeal of what the build in 19 was supposed to be about, starting it from the beginning. Got a couple big names and we made a couple big splashy moves. And for every Bradley Chubb, who is a locker room leader in all the right ways, there's a Jalen Ramsey who was very principled in his own belief of what felt needed to be done and how things needed to be gone about doing. And it was in conflict with the team. And that's why it's a part of the reason Jalen Ramsey's no longer here. So I appreciated the transparency on that front. I think Chris was also transparent about the Matthew Judon signing. It would be naive of me to say the health part wasn't involved because you guys have been there. We've had death by pass rush the last couple of years with all the injuries. But obviously having four guys, if they're healthy and they can really rush, it also helps the back end. So that was talking about the motivation of signing Matthew Judon. He talked about the comfort that he feels or the frustration that he feels. I mean, he said he brought to light some really unsavory things that people have sent to him and emails, and I'm glad he said it. we live in a world where there's not a lot of human connection, and Chris is somebody we don't hear from a lot. And I've had my own criticisms and questions about the way last season unfolded and kind of the direction of the team versus my own opinion. But Chris came straight out and said it, and I've gotten some emails from people telling me they hope my kids die of cancer. And if you're somebody who felt it was appropriate to send an email like that to Chris Grier, please go outside and touch some grass. Some of that's appalling. It's neither here nor there. But when asked about the comfort that he feels, he said, if I was comfortable and said I felt great about where things were, then I am a expletive, family-friendly show. Because I'm not being realistic if I say that about where we are as a team and where things are going after last season. So I'm frustrated like everyone else is that we didn't win enough games last year. I appreciate that transparency. So that's Chris Grier in a nutshell. Recommend you check the whole thing out. It's about 30 minutes on the Dolphins YouTube channel. But a couple other things. He disclosed the kicker strategy. The Dolphins signing Riley Patterson to the practice squad. They're going to elevate him for the first 3 weeks of the season. Jason Sanders is going to miss the first 4 because he's on IR to return. So they're going to have a bridge week where either they need to sign a 1-week holdover kicker for week 4 against Monday Night Football, or they need to elevate Riley Patterson if Sanders is going to miss more than 4 weeks. But to start, it's Patterson on the practice squad, elevated the first 3 weeks of the season, and he's going to kick. He talked about Kendall Lamm. They're bringing Kendall Lamm back to be OT4. He's going to have he had his physical today. I'm recording before 4 o'clock. So, I would assume that at 4 o'clock, if that transaction is finalized and he signs, that will be an addition to the Dolphins offensive line, potentially their 9th offensive lineman. You have Cam Smith going on the non-football injury list. For what reason? Chris said with the non-football injury stuff, we really don't get into it. But Cam, just did enough to survive roster cuts. And immediately, the first practice after roster cuts is on non-football injury list. And it's like the embodiment of the Cam Smith experience thus far. Hope whatever is going on with Cam is okay. But you could not have prompted a more appropriate turn of events to embody what Cam Smith's experience as being a member of the Dolphins has been. Then injured, comes back, shows some life in the second half of 2 preseason games, survives amidst some other injuries at corner, immediately goes on non-football injury list. Is what it is. But the Dolphins have 2 new corners. They officially signed Rasul Douglas this morning, waived to Jordan Colbert, safety, and then picked up a corner, a former second-round pick, JuJu Brents from the Indianapolis Colts, and they released Isaiah Johnson as the corresponding move on that front. So lots of moving parts. Not everything's finalized, but with Colbert out for Rasul Douglas, Isaiah Johnson out for JuJu Brents, presumably Kendall Lamm would be on the 53 for Cam Smith going on the non-football injury list. That's kind of where things stand. We're about an hour away from when 4 o'clock comes and they got to announce all their moves. Practice squad ads as well. We're getting into a little bit of JuJu Brents and practice squad ads. That's next. Make sure you guys stick with us. NFL season is almost here. FanDuel's making sure you're ready for kickoff with a can't-miss offer right now. New customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. I love using FanDuel because it fits however you like to bet, whether that's player props, same-game parlays, jumping in live action as it unfolds. They have something to make every game more exciting, whether you're watching your team or just keeping an eye on your fantasy lineup. It's quick, it's easy, it's the best way to add a little bit more energy to your Sundays all football season long. So if you're ready to play, download the FanDuel app now by visiting FanDuel.com to get started. That's FanDuel.com to place your first $5 bet. FanDuel, play your game. Quick request for anybody who is tuning into the show. Appreciate all of our everydayers as we always do. But here on the Locked On Network, we are putting together a survey to learn more about our listeners and want to make our favorite podcasts to make for you even better. We'd ask you to go to lockedonpodcast.com/survey to get started. Everyone who completes the survey will get entered for a chance to win one of 10 $100 Amazon gift cards. If you're watching on YouTube, we do have a QR code that you can use as well. JuJu Brents, former second-round draft choice out of Kansas State, had a chance to meet him at the Senior Bowl in 2023. Injuries have derailed his first 2 seasons. He's played less than 600 snaps across his first 2 years in the NFL. As a result, a little under-repped. The experience is a question there. Very, very, very good transitional quickness for a player of his stature. He's got there's elite length, and then there's JuJu Brents length. JuJu Brents has 34-inch arms. He has pass rusher arms at corner. It's like freakish length. Really plays physical when he's playing his best. That, along with Rasul Douglas and what they're asking for the other corners, whether that's Ethan Bonner or Jack Jones, who's working on his press technique to disrupt timing and help that pass rush get home because the timing of the routes is disrupted. That's kind of the book on JuJu Brents. Likes to play aggressive. He can play deep third or he could play in your face. That's kind of like Rasul Douglas. And that's where the Dolphins and this vision and Storm Ducks kind of the same deal. I think it's a great scheme fit. It's a player you're hoping can kind of put the injury bad luck behind him. But for a 53 waiver claim ad, it's a pretty low risk, in my opinion, risk to take for what's going to end up being your potentially your 5th corner to start. Now, the practice squad, we have that unit coming together pretty well. It's been reported that Jeff Wilson Jr. is going to be returning and coming back onto the practice squad. That'll be one of the players Chris Grier said in the presser. They're going to sign some vets to the practice squad and elevate them through the bridge season where Jalen Wright is banged up. So Jeff Wilson Jr. back on the practice squad. And then the following names courtesy of Marcel Louis-Jacques from ESPN. A.J. Henning and Theo Weiss at wide receiver. Tight end Hayden Rusey. Offensive lineman Braden Daniels and Josh Preeb. Defensive lineman Alex Huntley. Edge defenders Quentin Bell and Derek McClendon. Cornerbacks B.J. Adams and Cornell Armstrong. Safety John Saunders Jr. Kicker Riley Patterson. And then Jordan Colbert was listed as well, and that is presumably he was waived this morning, so he'll have to pass through waivers. And if he passes through waivers, he is presumably going to be back on the list as well. So that gives the Dolphins just a pair of spots left open to commit to other players, and they have a few of those spots they can go to players with tenure across the league. So they have some flexibility as far as adding bets. Maybe Isaiah Johnson takes one of those spots who just got cut for JuJu Brents to make room for JuJu Brents as well. So that's where we're at. A lot of action. A lot of moves. It's going to keep churning a little bit. Chris Grier said they were going to be active on the waiver claims. It's hard to say if the Dolphins might not have claimed any other players today aside of JuJu Brents. They might have claimed other players and they didn't get through waivers. I know the Jets got 3. The Titans got 4. Jalen Armour-Davis went to the Titans, who had the first spot in the waiver queue. First 4 weeks of the season, I believe it is. The waiver wire queue mirrors the previous year's NFL draft orders. The Dolphins sit 13th in that queue. So any players that got claimed by teams that picked in front of Miami could have picked those players and filed a waiver claim. So I'm going to kind of be keeping a watchful eye. We're going to see, is there another tight end shoe to drop somewhere along the way? Because that's the spot now. We added a 4th offensive tackle that has experience in the scheme. And Kendall Lamm, I think you could do a hell of a whole lot worse than Kendall Lamm as your 4th offensive tackle. I like the upside and the opportunity in the scheme fit for JuJu Brents at corner. You acknowledge the injury stuff there has kind of been a big blockade. Tight end's kind of the spot where I'm looking at it with a bit of a side eye, asking, okay, what else can we get done? But it's been a productive week for the Dolphins this week. They bring back Kendall Lamm, who had surgery at the offseason for the back injury that he was fighting through down the stretch last year. Rasul Douglas signs. JuJu Brents now added. Matthew Judon last week. Jeff Wilson's your insurance at running back. It's a pretty productive stretch as far as players who you feel like have a pretty sound body of work. You should know what you're going to get. And then there's some upside with it too, with JuJu Brents. That's going to do it for us here today on Locked On Dolphins. It is your team every day. Appreciate you guys as always. Check out the show. Make it a great rest of your day. I'm out of here. Go Fins.